There's an energy with stop motion that you can't even describe. It's got to do with giving things life. The Nightmare Before Christmas is far and away my favorite Halloween movie. In fact, it's one of my favorite movies, period. If you asked me years ago why it's one of my favorite movies, I really couldn't tell you why. It just simply was. But maybe like Tim Burton said, stop motion gives The Nightmare Before Christmas energy, vitality, and soul. Which is kind of ironic in a way, because a film featuring ghosts, witches, skeletons, and the Oogie Boogie Man seems anything but energetic and soulful. In my opinion though, stop motion offers the audience a more realistic texture than its CG counterpart. Humans, by nature, are tactile creatures. The need to bond through touching is built to our very core. And while CG animation can be very beautiful and elegant, it lacks that tactile nature. There's a veneer to it that makes it almost too perfect. And for the lack of a better term, the images themselves come from thin air. They're generated in a computer and they don't actually exist. And so by being created by a computer, they lack the very thing that we crave. Stop motion, on the other hand, necessitates the construction of backgrounds, character models, and outfits. Thus, they are real, unlike a computer-generated image. So when we see Jack walking down the moonlit hill, we're actually seeing a handmade doll that is being contorted in such a way that it mimics walking. It's actually a real thing. Everything about it actually exists. And trust me when I say this, that comes through the screen, and you can feel it as a viewer. And besides marveling at the sheer amount of effort involved in making this look so seamless, one begins to imagine what the environment smells like and feels like. Is the ground cold? Is it hard to walk on? Does the cemetery have a foul smell? These are the kind of questions I never find myself asking when watching a CG film. In addition, The Nightmare Before Christmas has a wholesome unevenness to it. Buildings are slanted and characters don't look quite proportional. It just exudes a more authentic world environment. On the other hand, CG animation smooths out all the imperfections and makes everything look proportional. And in doing so, everything sort of blends together. Everything looks homogeneous and a little bit too perfect. And because of this, sometimes those films lack a soul. The Nightmare Before Christmas, however, has a personality all of its own. It's simply unlike anything you'll ever see in your life. It's distinguished, remarkable, breathtaking, and out of this world. It reminds me a lot of a Stanley Kubrick film. Every scene feels like a piece of art, like a well thought out brilliancy of imagination and provocativeness. I simply cannot speak highly enough of its sheer captivating aesthetic. And while the art is praiseworthy in its own right, the story and characters are equally enchanting. Jack Skellington, better known by his moniker, the Pumpkin King, is truly a horrifying skeleton. But underneath this facade, he is an authentic gentleman who is quiet, placid, reserved, and patient. He doesn't allow his emotions to get the better of him, and doesn't seem to give in to his anger. Yet, underneath this lies a tortured soul, who is undergoing an identity crisis. Despite the fact that he's loved by the inhabitants of Halloween Town, he has become disillusioned with his life. The monotony of performing the same routine over and over again has put him into a pit of despair.
There's an empty place in my bones.
Essentially, Jack is forced into embodying his persona as the Pumpkin King for perpetuity. The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, fittingly enough, a kind of mask, designed on the one hand to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other hand, to conceal the true nature of the individual. And Jack's true nature is much more complex than one would guess upon first glance. He expresses a deep yearning to go out into the world and truly find himself. Though he doesn't know exactly what that will entail, he has to know. Because persisting as he is killing him inside. So Jack proceeds to enter a forest in which he finds something very unusual. Now before we get further into this, we have to explain why the forest in and of itself is the pivotal archetypal motif. Now forests are places that are far away from the strictures and constraints of society. They are a place where one becomes attuned to their animal-like nature. It's a place where the quote-unquote mask of society can be removed. I think you see where I'm going with this. It is in the forest that Jack metaphorically takes off the persona of of the Pumpkin King and discovers a new world unlike anything he's ever seen. In Christmas Town, Jack experiences a childlike whimsy, an excitement, and a creative spark of inspiration. The emptiness that had been growing in his bones for so many years was now being filled with joy and compassion. Now, in Carl Jung's psychological model, he defined a psychological archetype known as the shadow. This is an unconscious phenomena that consists of everything outside the light of consciousness. Now, most people will think that, given the nature of a shadow, that it houses negative emotions. However, this is only partially true. Now, while a shadow is the repressed component of the psyche, it contains both positive and negative qualities. For example, someone who displays terrifying qualities like Jack would possess a shadow that is compassionate, nice, and forgiving. So think of the shadow as the opposite of what you embody in your everyday life. And because Jack is portraying the definition of pure evil, his shadow is embodied by a being of pure niceness, i.e. Santa Claus. And if you'll notice, the first time that we see Santa Claus is him as a shadow on the snow. This is very symbolic, because everything that Santa Claus represents is what's repressed in Jack's shadow. And so, Jack needs to take all of these repressed emotions and bring them to the surface. And to sort of reinforce this connection between Santa Claus and Jack's shadow, everything that Santa Claus is the opposite of Jack, which is exactly what you would expect of someone's shadow. Jack is a long, tall, and skinny man, whereas Santa Claus is short, stout, and fat. They are polar opposites in terms of their physical appearance and personalities. And in Carl Jung's psychological model, one needs to integrate the repressed shadow self into their ego consciousness to become a more complete person. However, Jack doesn't quite do this. Well, not at first at least. Instead of finding a way to complement his personality as the Pumpkin King through Santa's example, he simply takes on the persona of Santa Claus himself. Or, as he puts it, he takes on the persona of Santa Claus. And so what Jack is really doing here is he's taking his persona as the Pumpkin King and repressing it, just like he repressed his persona as Santa Claus. So it's just a role reversal. And in this regard, he hasn't solved any of his psychological issues. He's merely substituted one problem for a new problem. Therefore, it should come as no surprise that his adventure as Santa Claus blows up right in his face. When one tries desperately to be good and wonderful and perfect, then all the more the shadow develops a definite will to be black and evil and destructive. People cannot see that. They are always striving to be marvelous. And then they discover that terrible destructive things happen, which they cannot understand. And then they deny that such facts have anything to do with them. Or if they admit to them, they take them for natural afflictions. Or they try to minimize them and shift the responsibility elsewhere. The fact is that if one tries beyond one's capacity to be perfect, the shadow descends into hell and becomes the devil. And because Jack took on the persona of Santa Claus, his new shadow is invariably the Oogie Boogie Man, a being of pure evil and malice, a being that gives in to all his lower urges like gambling, violence, and lustfulness. Jack henceforth is lying at a crossroads. Santa Claus and the Oogie Boogie Man are emblematic of his two diametrically opposed personalities. Choosing one over the other is quite destructive. So he therefore has to find a way to embrace who he truly is, while allowing adequate room for his shadow to take a firm place in his ego consciousness. It's no surprise that when Jack comes to this realization that he's being held by a statue of an angel, this is eerily reminiscent of Michelangelo's Pieta, which is a sculpture of Jesus lying in the lap of Mary after the crucifixion. Now, in Carl Jung's psychological model, Jesus Christ represents the archetypal self, the totality of all psychological content. Hence, Jack realizes he needs to integrate rather than separate. And we see this come through beautifully at the end of the movie, when Jack returns to Halloween Town and embraces Sally on the moonlit hill. He acknowledges feelings of love and compassion, two emotions within himself that he didn't recognize earlier. But to get to this point, he had to endure his own personal demons. He had to fight with a monster. In effect, he had to deal with his own personal nightmare. A nightmare before becoming the Christ-like archetype, hence the name of the movie, The Nightmare Before Christmas.